The forgotten prophecies Dr. Nexus Vale's forearms moved with practiced precision as he carefully brushed centuries of dust from the obsidian tablet. The air in the archive chamber was thick and still, filled with the weight of forgotten civilizations. For 200 years, he had dedicated his life to studying the remains of extinct species, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to discover. The tablet was from the Corvani race, a peaceful trading civilization that had vanished 3,000 years ago. Their cities had been found empty, their ships floating abandoned in space. No one knew what had happened to them. But this tablet, hidden in the deepest vault of their most sacred temple, might finally provide answers. As the ancient text became visible under his careful cleaning, Nexus felt his heart skip a beat. The words were written in Old Corvani, a dialect he had spent decades learning. But it was not the language that shocked him. It was the message. "Beware the children of water," the tablet read. "They come from the third world of a yellow star. Their bodies are weak, but their spirits cannot be broken. They fight not for glory or conquest, but for the right to exist. When cornered, they become something else, something terrible. They will turn your own weapons against you. They will use your strength to become stronger. Do not seek them out. Do not wake them. Let them sleep in their distant realm. For if they ever reach the stars, the galaxy will never be the same." Nexus set the tablet down with trembling hands. In all his years of research, he had never seen anything like this. The Corvani were known for their calm, logical approach to life. They did not write warnings. They did not speak of fear. Yet here was a message that seemed born from pure terror. He reached for another tablet. This one from the Zephyrian Empire. The Zephyrians had ruled a quarter of the galaxy before mysteriously disappearing 2,000 years ago. Their tablet was made of crystallized metal, and the words were etched with laser precision. "The bipedal threat must never reach the void," it said. "We have observed them from afar. They possess no advanced technology, no unified government, no grand military. Yet they are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. They adapt to any environment. They learn from every defeat. Most terrifying of all, they reproduce their knowledge. What one learns, they all learn. They are not individuals. They are a collective consciousness disguised as separate beings." Nexus felt his skin change color with shock. The Zephyrians had been famous for their military might. They had conquered dozens of worlds and never lost a single battle. What could have frightened them so much that they would carve warnings in imperishable metal? Over the next several months, Nexus discovered tablet after tablet, recording after recording, all from different extinct civilizations: the Mentari Collective, the Draconic Alliance, the Infinite Spiral, the Crystal Singers. 15 different species spread across the galaxy, living in different time periods. None of them had ever met the others, yet they all told the same story. They spoke of a species from a blue world in the outer rim, a species that should have been harmless, but was somehow the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. The descriptions were remarkably consistent. Bipedal, creatures with soft skin and no natural weapons. They lived short lives and seemed to spend most of their time fighting each other. But when threatened from outside, they became something else entirely. The Mentari called them the unity that emerges from chaos. The Draconics named them the fire that grows stronger in darkness. The Crystal Singers simply wrote, "They are the song that never ends." Each civilization had discovered them independently. Each had made the same decision: stay away. Do not contact them. Do not let them know that the wider galaxy exists, because if they ever learned about the stars, they would find a way to reach them. And once they reached the stars, everything would change. Nexus compiled his research into a comprehensive report. The evidence was overwhelming. 15 independent sources, all describing the same threat, all warning of the same outcome. He requested an emergency session with the Galactic Council. The council chamber was a marvel of engineering, a massive sphere that could hold representatives from thousands of worlds. Species from across the galaxy gathered in floating platforms, their forms as diverse as the stars themselves. Gas-based entities floated in containment fields. Silicon-based life forms communicated through harmonic vibrations. Energy beings flickered in and out of visibility. At the center of it all sat Council Prime Zax, a being so old that his crystalline form had grown to twice the size of most of his species. He had seen the rise and fall of 100 civilizations. Dr. Vale? Zax's voice resonated through the chamber. You claim to have discovered evidence of a galactic threat. Present your findings. Nexus activated the holographic display. Images of the ancient tablets filled the air above the chamber. Honored, Council, I have discovered warnings from 15 extinct civilizations. All of them speak of the same species. All of them describe the same threat. He began reading from the tablets. As the warnings continued, a murmur began to spread through the chamber. Some representatives seemed intrigued. Others appeared skeptical. But as Nexus described the location of this mysterious species, the mood began to change. The third planet of a yellow star in Sector 7G, Nexus said. According to our star charts, this corresponds to a system we have catalogued as Sol 3. The planet is populated by a primitive species that has not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. Councillor Threx, a member of the militant Kavari race, laughed. Dr. Vale, our scouts have observed this system. The dominant species is barely out of their industrial age. They fight with chemical explosives and metal projectiles. They cannot even unite their own planet. How could such primitives threaten the galaxy? That is exactly what makes them dangerous, Nexus replied. According to these warnings, their primitive nature is deceptive. They appear weak individually, but they possess something that advanced civilizations have lost. And what is that? Asked Councillor Miara of the telepathic Esper Collective. Desperation, Nexus said. They have evolved on a world that actively tries to kill them. Natural disasters, climate extremes, predators, diseases, cosmic radiation. Their planet is a death world by galactic standards. They have survived by becoming the most adaptable species in known space. The chamber filled with dismissive sounds from dozens of different species. Prime Zax raised one crystalline appendage for silence. Dr. Vale, even if these warnings were accurate, they describe a pre-spaceflight civilization. What threat could they possibly pose to starfaring empires? Before Nexus could answer, an aide rushed into the chamber. The small, nervous creature whispered something in Prime Zax's auditory receptor. The ancient being's crystalline form began to glow brighter. It seems, Prime Zax announced, that this discussion has become more than theoretical. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected multiple faster-than-light signatures originating from the Sol system. The species you describe has apparently achieved interstellar flight. The chamber erupted in surprised chatter. Nexus felt his blood run cold. It was happening exactly as the ancient warnings had predicted. How many ships? Asked Councillor Threx. Initial reports indicate at least 12 vessels, all heading in different directions. They appear to be exploration missions. Nexus stepped forward. Honored Council, we must act now. The warnings are clear. The warnings, interrupted Councillor Miara, are from dead civilizations. Perhaps they died because they were too afraid to face challenges. Her telepathic voice carried a note of disdain. We are not as weak as the ancients. I agree, said Councillor Threx. If these humans are truly dangerous, we should deal with them before they become a real threat. A few well-placed strikes on their homeworld should end this before it begins. No, Nexus shouted. The tablets warn specifically against direct confrontation. Every civilization that tried to fight them was destroyed. They learn from every battle. They adapt to every weapon. Military action will only make them stronger. Prime Zax considered this. What do you propose, Dr. Vale? Containment. We establish a quarantine around their space. We prevent them from making contact with other civilizations until we can study them further. Unacceptable, declared Councillor Threx. The Kavari Empire does not run from primitives. Then you will learn what the ancients learned, Nexus said grimly, but it will be too late. The debate continued for hours. In the end, the council voted to take a middle path. They would establish contact with the humans, but from a position of strength. A joint fleet would be assembled from the military forces of the major empires. The humans would be given a choice: accept protectorate status under Galactic Council authority or face the consequences. As the council session ended, Nexus gathered his tablets with a heavy heart. He had tried to warn them. The ancient civilizations had tried to warn them. But like so many before them, the current powers of the galaxy believed they were too advanced, too powerful, too clever to fall to a primitive species from a distant world. 3 weeks later, the joint fleet assembled in space near Proxima Centauri. 50 ships from 12 different empires representing the finest military technology in the galaxy. Admiral Keth of the Sirath Navy commanded the fleet from the flagship Eternal Victory. The admiral was confident that this would be a simple, diplomatic mission backed by overwhelming force. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Jaka from the sensor station, "we're detecting 3 human vessels approaching our position." "Only 3? Admiral Keth's mandibles clicked in amusement. "They either have no idea what they're facing or they're even more primitive than we thought." The human ships were crude by galactic standards. They appeared to be built from basic metal alloys with simple fusion drives. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and primitive energy beams. Any one of the alien vessels could have destroyed all 3 human ships without effort. "Open a communication channel," Admiral Keth ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the lead human vessel. A female human sat in the command chair, her face calm but alert. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of experience. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Endeavor," she said in accented but clear galactic standard. "I represent the United Earth Coalition. We've been monitoring your communications and we understand you wish to speak with us." "Admiral," Keth was surprised that the humans had learned galactic standard so quickly, but he pushed the thought aside. "Captain Chen, I am Admiral Keth of the Galactic Council Navy. By order of the Council, you and your species are to submit to Council authority. You will cease all interstellar expansion and accept protectorate status." Captain Chen was quiet, for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note that Admiral Keth couldn't quite identify. "Admiral, with respect, we decline your offer." "This was not an offer, Captain. This was a demand. Then we decline your demand." Admiral Keith felt his patience wearing thin. "Captain, you are facing the combined military might of 12 galactic empires. You have 3 primitive vessels. Surrender now, and your species will be treated fairly." Captain Chen smiled, and Admiral Keth suddenly realized what that note in her voice had been. It wasn't fear or defiance. It was pity. "Admiral," she said, "you should know that these aren't the only human ships in this system." Before Admiral Keth could respond, his sensor officer called out in alarm. "Sir, new contacts, multiple ships decloaking around our formation." The tactical display lit up like a festival. Dozens of human vessels appeared from seemingly empty space, surrounding the alien fleet. But these weren't the crude exploration ships they had expected. These were sleek, advanced warships that looked like they belonged in a galactic navy. "How is this possible?" Admiral Keth whispered. Captain Chen's smile widened. "Admiral, did you really think we've spent the last 3 weeks sitting idle? We've been studying your technology, your formations, your communication protocols. We've learned quite a bit. Those ships, where did you get that technology?" "We built it. You see, Admiral, when humans are threatened, we don't just fight back. We evolve. We adapt. We become whatever we need to become to survive." Admiral Keth realized with growing horror that the human ships weren't just advanced. They were using technology he didn't recognize. Somehow in just 3 weeks the humans had leaped ahead by centuries. "Impossible," he breathed. "You're about to learn, Admiral, why the ancients tried to warn you about us. The species that refuses to die." 6 months after first contact, Admiral Keth stood in the ruins of what had once been the most advanced military academy in the Sirath Empire. Through the shattered dome overhead, he could see human ships moving across the sky like silver fish through an ocean of stars. They moved with a confidence that chilled him. This was no longer their galaxy. It belonged to the humans now. The war had begun as a simple police action, the combined might of 12 galactic empires against a single primitive world. It should have been over in days. Instead, it had become a nightmare that had lasted half a year and showed no signs of ending. The humans didn't fight like any species the galaxy had ever encountered. When their first fleet was destroyed, they didn't retreat. They studied the wreckage. Within weeks, they had rebuilt their ships with improvements that incorporated the best features of their enemy's technology. When their second fleet was ambushed, they didn't mourn their losses. They learned from the ambush and used the same tactics against their attackers. But it was more than just adaptation. The humans seemed to approach warfare like a science experiment. Every battle was a test. Every defeat was data. Every victory was a lesson to be applied on an even larger scale. Admiral Keth thought back to the Battle of Rigel, where everything had begun to go wrong. The humans had attacked a Kavari stronghold with a fleet that should have been easy to defeat. But instead of engaging in traditional ship-to-ship combat, they had done something unprecedented. They had weaponized the star itself. Using a combination of gravity manipulators and quantum field generators, technology that should have taken them centuries to develop, they had caused a solar flare that disabled every ship in the system. Then, while their enemies floated helpless, the humans had simply captured everything. The Kavari admiral commanding the defense had sent a message to the human fleet: "You fight without honor." The human response had become legend across the galaxy. "We fight to win." That was when the other empires began to realize they weren't dealing with a traditional military force. They were facing a species that viewed the very concept of fair fighting as a luxury they couldn't afford. The war escalated rapidly. The humans captured Sirath colonies and turned them into manufacturing centers. They recruited species that had been oppressed by the major empires, offering them something no galactic power had ever offered: true equality in exchange for cooperation. Within 3 months, the human fleet had grown from dozens of ships to thousands. But these weren't just human vessels. They were hybrid creations combining human innovation with the best technology from dozens of different species. Ships that could phase in and out of dimensions. Vessels that could disguise themselves as asteroids or space debris. Weapons that turned an enemy's own shields into a weapon against them. Admiral Keth had watched his own flagship, the Eternal Victory, turn its guns on the rest of his fleet. The humans had somehow rewritten its computer systems in the middle of battle, convincing the ship's artificial intelligence that the Sirath fleet was actually the enemy. How do you fight an enemy that turns everything into a weapon? He had asked Dr. Nexus Vale during one of their few meetings since the war began. You don't, the archaeologist had replied. That's what the ancients tried to tell us. Now, standing in the ruins of his world's greatest military institution, Admiral Keith finally understood what Dr. Vale had meant. The humans hadn't just won through superior technology or tactics. They had fundamentally changed the nature of warfare itself. A soft sound behind him made Admiral Keth turn. A human soldier stood in the doorway, her uniform bearing the insignia of the Earth Coalition Marine Corps. She was young, probably no more than 25 standard years old, but her eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences far beyond her age. Admiral Keth, she said in perfect Sirath. I'm Lieutenant Rodriguez. I've been sent to escort you to the peace negotiations. Admiral Keth nodded slowly. Even their soldiers were different from what he had expected. This young female warrior showed him respect despite having every reason to treat him as a defeated enemy. It was yet another example of how the humans refused to fit into any category the galaxy understood. As they walked through the ruined academy, Lieutenant Rodriguez spoke quietly. I studied here, you know, before the war. Admiral Keth looked at her in surprise. You studied at the Sirath Military Academy? Exchange program. I was part of a small group of humans who were allowed to observe galactic military doctrine. Your instructors were excellent teachers. Then you learned our strategies. Lieutenant Rodriguez smiled sadly. Admiral, we didn't just learn your strategies. We learned why they don't work against humans. The peace negotiations were being held in what had once been the council chamber on Sirath Prime. but the massive space had been reconfigured. Instead of the traditional setup with the major powers in elevated positions looking down on lesser species, the humans had arranged everything in a circle. Every representative sat at the same level. Captain Sarah Chen, now promoted to admiral, sat at the human delegation's table. She looked older than she had 6 months ago, but her eyes still held that same calm intelligence that had unnerved Admiral Kith during their first meeting. Prime Zack sat across from her, his crystalline form dimmed with defeat. Around the circle sat representatives from all the major galactic powers, their postures speaking of a resignation that would have been unthinkable before the war. "The terms are simple," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Complete ceasefire, recognition of human sovereignty over all systems currently under Earth Coalition control, and establishment of the new Galactic Cooperative." "Cooperative?" asked Counselor Miara. Her telepathic voice sounded strained. "What does that mean?" "It means no more empires," Admiral Chen replied. "No more species ruling over other species. Every world gets a voice. Every civilization gets a choice." Counselor Threx, who had started the war with his calls for human extermination, leaned forward. "And if we refuse?" Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made Admiral Keth's skin crawl. "Counselor, you've seen what happens when humans are forced to fight for survival. Do you really want to see what happens when we're fighting for justice?" The threat was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that it was somehow more terrifying than any display of military might. Dr. Nexus Vale, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. "Admiral Chen, I have studied the ancient warnings about your species for most of my life. There is one thing I need to understand. The tablet spoke of humans as a threat to the galaxy. But what I've seen during this war, you're not conquerors. You're liberators. Why?" Admiral Chen considered the question carefully. "Dr. Vale, the ancients were right to fear us, but they misunderstood what they were seeing. They saw a species that couldn't be defeated, and they assumed we must be destroyers. But humans don't fight to dominate. We fight to survive. And we've learned that we survive best when everyone around us is free to thrive." She gestured to the representatives around the circle. "Every species we've encountered has something to offer. The Sirath have military discipline. The Espers have telepathic coordination. The Kavari have industrial capability. The Ancients saw this as a threat because they thought in terms of conquest. But we see it as an opportunity for cooperation." Prime Zax's voice resonated with ancient weariness. "And if we refuse to cooperate, then you'll be left behind," Admiral Chen said. Simply, "The galaxy is changing, Prime Zax. The old ways of doing things, empires ruling through fear, strong species dominating weak ones, that's over. Not because we're forcing it to end, but because there's a better way." Around the circle, Admiral Keth could see the representatives processing this. The humans weren't offering them the choice between surrender and destruction. They were offering the choice between evolution and irrelevance. It was, he realized, the most human approach possible. They had turned even peace negotiations into a form of adaptation. Over the following weeks, the Galactic Cooperative was established. It wasn't perfect. No system involving dozens of different species could be. But it was something unprecedented in galactic history. A truly democratic union where decisions were made by consensus rather than by force. The humans, despite having won the war, didn't take a leadership role. Instead, they created a rotating council system where different species took turns guiding policy. They kept only one permanent position for themselves, the Department of Problem Solving. "It's what we're best at," Admiral Chen explained to Admiral Keth during one of their many conversations as the new system took shape. "Every other species seems to have evolved to fill a specific niche. You Sirath are natural warriors and organizers. The Espers are gifted with telepathy and social harmony. The Kavari are master builders and engineers. And humans?" Admiral Chen smiled. "We're the species that refuses to accept that problems can't be solved. When other species hit a wall, they either go around it or accept it's there. Humans look at the wall and ask, What if this wasn't actually a wall? What if it was a door and we just haven't found the right way to open it yet? It was an attitude that transformed everything. Diseases that had plagued certain species for millennia were cured by human medical researchers who refused to accept that some problems were unsolvable. Hostile planets were terraformed using techniques that combined human engineering with alien, environmental sciences. Trade disputes that had lasted for centuries were resolved by human negotiators who approached diplomacy like a puzzle to be solved rather than a contest to be won. The ancient warnings Admiral Keith realized had been both completely accurate and completely wrong. The humans were indeed the most dangerous species in the galaxy, but they were dangerous in the same way that fire was dangerous, destructive if misused, but capable of bringing light and warmth and life when properly harnessed. A year after the peace negotiations, Admiral Keth found himself serving as the Sci-Fi representative to the Cooperative Council. The war crimes he had committed during the conflict had been forgiven, another inexplicably human attitude. Instead of punishment, he had been asked to help design a new approach to Galactic security that would prevent future conflicts. He was working late in his office when Dr. Nexus Vale stopped by for a visit. The archaeologist looked healthier than he had in years. His work studying human history and culture had given him a new purpose. "I've been thinking about those ancient warnings," Dr. Vale said as he settled into a chair across from Admiral Keith's desk. "I finally understand what happened to those 15 civilizations. They were destroyed by humans?" "No," Dr. Vale said. "They were destroyed by their own fear of humans. Each of those civilizations discovered Earth independently. Each of them saw what humans were capable of, and each of them made the same choice. They decided to hide from the human threat rather than face it." Admiral Keth considered this. "But humans never even knew they existed." "Exactly. They spent so much energy avoiding contact with humans that they stopped advancing. They stopped exploring. They stopped growing. They became so focused on the threat that might come from outside that they forgot to deal with the threats that were already inside their borders." Dr. Vale pulled out one of his ancient tablets, this one from the Crystal Singers. "I found this passage last week. It's been mistranslated for centuries. We thought it said, 'They are the song that never ends.' But the actual translation is, 'They are the song that helps others find their voice.'" The two former enemies sat in comfortable silence as the implications sank in. The ancient civilizations hadn't been warning the galaxy about human aggression. They had been warning about human potential, the potential to change everything, to make everyone around them stronger, to turn a galaxy of separate empires into a cooperative community. "They were afraid," Admiral Keth said finally, "not of what humans would do to them, but of what humans would make them become." "The Crystal Singers have another phrase," Dr. Vale said. "It translates roughly as, 'the species that makes all other,' species more than they thought they could be." Through the window of Admiral Keith's office, they could see human ships working alongside vessels from dozens of other species. Construction fleets building new space stations, scientific expeditions heading out to explore uncharted regions, diplomatic vessels carrying representatives to worlds that had never known peace. The humans had kept their promise. They had indeed changed everything. But they had done it not through conquest or domination, but by showing the galaxy what was possible when different species worked together instead of against each other. The ancient warnings had been right. The humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They were dangerous because they refused to accept that things had to stay the way they were. They were dangerous because they believed that every problem had a solution, every conflict had a resolution, and every enemy could become a friend. Most dangerous of all, they had a habit of making everyone around them believe it too. As Admiral, Keth prepared to leave his office for the night. He paused at his desk to look at a photo that had been taken during the first Cooperative Council session. Hundreds of representatives from dozens of species, all working together toward common goals. At the center of the group, Admiral Sarah Chen stood with her arm around Prime Zax's crystalline form, both of them smiling. The ancient civilizations had tried to warn the galaxy about humans. They had been absolutely right about everything, they had said. But they had missed the most important point of all. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is hope.